View. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Live with Wolfman. I'm your host, Jacob Wolfman, and this is a show about all the things that you're interested in and all the things that I'm interested in. We are talking about the rules of the sport, particularly probably the NASCAR rules, and for forms particularly. That's probably where we're going to cater most of the discussion, but we can open it up and talk about whichever you want. We want to talk about point fighting rules, cool. You want to talk about other circuits, NBL, cool, ATA, cool, whatever. But we're just going to have a discussion and kind of talk about, like, I don't know, our dream wish list, maybe some gripes we have about some of the rules, some rules that need to be reinforced or updated, or who knows. I put the question out there before the show started a couple hours ago, and I let you guys weigh in, and you guys weighed in. We got a lot of things, a lot of thoughts here, and I haven't had a chance to really read through all of them. There's a lot of comments here. So I thought what we could do is just kind of piece through and pick some comments and start talking about them. And as always, this show is a participatory show, so I will be checking the comments, seeing what you guys are saying, and then, you know, we'll discuss. This is an us thing. It's not a me thing, right? Jeannie, what's up? Tony, how you doing? Nikki, Mark. Joseph says this is the nicest shirt I've worn. Thank you. Actually, okay, so first off, I do want to mention that this show, even though I work with Hyper, this show is not sponsored by Hyper. This is not a Hyper show. This is the Jacob Wolfman show. Anytime I talk about Hyper or I wear Hyper, it is specifically because I just like Hyper and I support what Hyper's all about, and half of the clothes I own say Hyper on them anyhow, so that's just what you end up seeing. But today, I got to give a shout-out to this jacket. I got to give a shout-out to Jason Morgan. This is a gift he gave me. It's a custom jacket. It's got a Hyper sweet logo on the back. I got my Hyper shirt. This is also custom. This is actually this shirt on the Hyper shop is only available for females. It only comes in a female shirt, but he made a couple guy cuts, so I'm wearing it. It's cool. It matches the jacket. It's got this like rough hipster thing. I don't know. I don't care about clothes, man. I suck at wearing clothes. I don't know. But thanks, Joseph. All right. Let's talk about some of your ideas and thoughts about the rules for 2018. So speaking of Joseph, he's actually the first guy on my list here. And he says that center judges and promoters are not... this is something he wants to change. I got to rephrase how I read it. He says, center judges, promoters not telling kids and parents that commas will never win because it's not practical enough in CMX weapons, mind you. So I found that funny. Obviously, there's like some sort of personal gripe between, like, this cannot be some reoccurring issue. There must have been some judge someday that must have hated on commas, but it is hilarious. I mean, there does need to be some sort of moderation, I think, and some sort of like accountability for judges and some of the advice they give. I personally have, when I was growing up and I was competing, I've experienced some really poor feedback from judges that aggravated me and actually just pushed me to train harder. I remember one time I was an underbelt, I was a brown belt, I was competing at Battle of Atlanta, and I got third place or something. I didn't win, basically. I don't know what place I got. But I went up to the judge and I asked what I can do to improve, and his response was that I should probably just train a different style because my body type wasn't good for sport karate. And I was like, screw you, dude. Like, how am I supposed to ever respect you as a judge if your feedback is quit what you're doing? You know, like, that's just garbage. And so there's so much ego in this sport with judges, and, you know, they gotta get checked sometimes. And I think this show is a great platform to check some of these egomaniac, old fat judges that tell kids that they should train a different sport or that their weapon is inferior to other weapons. You realize that like these kids actually paid a lot of money to be here, and they trained forever to get to this point, and that's the feedback you give them. Commas will never win because they're not practical enough. Your body type doesn't match your style. Like, it's horse. I don't want to swear, but not good. Let's just say not good. Not happy with that. It's really dumb. Yeah. Chrissy says, thank you for wearing clothes. You guys are still on about this jacket. You gotta relax about the jacket. Let's see. I wanna make sure I'm up to date with everybody's comments. As you guys have any feedback. So Dalton says, I think creative weapons needs a serious downgrade with the whole flying thing. I think there's too much confusion with what is creative and what is and what's not, and what should be easier to limit it to just throws and simple kicks. So Dalton, I'm not sure I grasp what you mean when you say I think that creative weapons needs a serious downgrade with the whole flying thing. Are you talking about flying commas, or are you talking about tricking or like flips? But if you could be more specific, I don't know what to say other than that. What's up, Dalton? All right, so Holly Ham says constructive criticism, maybe. That would be helpful, right? Like, let's not just, if you say something like your commas, nobody's going to win with commas because they're not a practical enough weapon. That's not constructive criticism. That's just your silly, dumb opinion that helps no one. So maybe we can give some criticism like, maybe you need to work on cleaner cuts, or maybe you need to be a little bit more original, or do something that impresses us, like something new and fresh, and be innovative. Like that's constructive criticism that, you need to do those things in order to beat the other weapons if you have some sort of really strong bias that you think commas are just a dumb weapon. But if you think commas are that bad of a weapon, you probably should not be judging weapons at all if you have that strong a viewpoint and you disregard the entire performance because you just don't like a weapon. All right, let's move on. We got lots and lots of rule changes and feedback and stuff. Desmond says that we need to separate traditional and XMA for grands, Ki rules, different kata for tiebreak. Okay, so there's a lot of things here. Let's break it down. So separate traditional and XMA for grands. That's an interesting concept. What do you guys think about that? Like in grands, should they separate traditional and XMA? And let's not call it XMA. I don't like that term because that term has been branded into a brand, and it's really confusing. So we'll just call it CMX, Creative Musical Extreme. Personally, I have to say that when I have watched competitors compete, I don't know how they judge. I mean, this is how they judge. They look for the mistakes in the grands, right? So for traditional, they just look to see if you slip up. And then for the extreme competitor, they look to see if you slip up. And then they watch the creative and they look to see if you slip up. And that's like pretty much the number one factor that dictates who's going to win, which makes sense. But other than that, it's really hard to compare apples to oranges and judging like what's the better performance. I will say, based off of what I've seen in the sport, the creative competitor is always the underdog to the traditional and the extreme. And that is kind of unfortunate. And I think that is a fault of the creative division rule structure, which we could talk length in great detail, which I have before about that. But it's an interesting idea to separate them. I kind of like it. I think that if you won your traditional, or you won in the extreme, or you won in the creative, like you won, congratulations. And now you're going for the winner of winners. That's what grands is. So I think, I'm not sure I agree that you should separate them. I'm like, hey, you won, congrats. If there were a lot of different types of traditional divisions, maybe there's like a huge Korean division, a huge Japanese division, a huge Chinese division, and like even more, and like you could go those traditional styles against each other in like a traditional thing. I know that does happen at some tournaments, and that's cool. But I don't mind having a traditional versus an extreme form side by side on stage. It's hard to judge, but it seems to be a 50-50 blend of who wins between the two sides of the spectrum, and then the middle guy never wins. Wow, you guys are commenting like really fast here. Jason says they shouldn't separate. So he's kind of, I agree with you, Jason. However, NASCA gets excited over Okinawan style forms. Oh, you guys are commenting so fast, I can't see it. They're for Chinese and Korean styles never win. Therefore, you have to split them to give other styles a chance. You know what? That is a common thing that I've heard many times by many people, that there is a huge bias in the traditional division for Japanese forms. Like I've seen a lot of people comment saying that the Korean styles never get a chance. And if that's what you guys say, I'm going to take your word for it. What I see on stage, I have to agree with you. I can't think of too often where I see Korean styles in the grands, and it's usually a Japanese style. I have my own theories as to why that is. In here, I'll just tell you my theory. And call me like a conspiracy theorist nut job, but I believe that there is a bias towards Japanese style, and that is because it's because of politics, straight up. It's because the 2020 Olympics is going to allow karate, and that NASCA wants to produce Olympic competitors, and Japanese is the only way to do that. So I don't have any proof. That's just my harebrained conspiracy theory. Feel free to spread the rumor. I just created something, but I think that there might be some truth to that as to why Japanese might win a lot. But again, how do you enforce that on a grand scale? And every judge always has Japanese win over Korean. I don't know. It's just my gut reaction, like subtext what might be happening. But it is interesting. Tarek says they should put a ban on Gopai's show. I can't watch that form anymore. That's funny. Gopai's show, from my understanding, that particular form was actually created as a sport karate traditional form. It's not actually a traditional form. It doesn't come from any traditional roots necessarily. It just uses traditional slow movement. I don't know the truth of that, but if people don't like it, I've heard it's kind of losing its flair. And I've seen, actually, truthfully, I have seen people do Gopai's show, and the real traditionalists out there that aren't part of the sport karate scene, they're part of like their particular style, they rag on Gopai's show, and they just chew it up. They see people compete with it, and these videos literally go viral with hate. I've seen tens of thousands of views of people hating on Gopai's show from like the traditionalist side of the martial arts world, which I don't really get into too much. So I don't know the whole traditional scene as much. I'm definitely more in like the open style sport karate world, but yeah, I don't know how I feel about you inventing a traditional form to compete in the traditional division. I think that totally aligns with like the values of what sport karate is about, but in reality, I think you get chewed out and torn apart for trying to think outside the box of tradition. All right, what else we got here? Chrissy says, Desmond, you also had a couple other rules that you said you want Ki rules and some other things, but I'm going to circle back to that because other people said that too, so I'll give them a chance to speak. But thanks for commenting, Desmond. Chrissy says, here's my thoughts. I'm not going to say who, but she just had a conversation with someone, and in regards to the women's division. And if they want more women to compete, they have to treat women the same they treat men. There's not much motivation for women to compete. And then, for example, so-and-so wins in traditional forms, but you never see them do a traditional form on stage because they also win with the creative division, and they have to choose which one to do. And if it was split up like the men's, you'd be able to see them do both. So Chrissy, I'm not sure in grands, again, I think it's like traditional goes against extreme most of the time. So I'm not 100% sure of what that was about. Maybe you can further explain that. But I would in general like to see more women compete. And I have heard gripes that it isn't fair. Like AK Warrior Cup, for example, there are some issues with that where the men and women go head to head to compete for the AK Warrior Cup, and the women just never, ever, ever, ever win. And so there is some problems there with that particular thing, but in general, yeah, if you have more concepts and ideas of like how to encourage more women to compete in the sport, by all means share them. I have to say that definitely in the sport world, it is a male-dominated scene, but martial arts is not necessarily a male-dominated practice. When you go to any martial arts school, it's about 50% women. They just don't compete as often as the men do. Lacey says, I would love to see people doing traditional kiops. I don't know what. Someone explain the difference to me. Traditional kiops, not excessive amounts of them. Yeah, so there definitely has been a shift in the last few years for more concise yells. I've seen that happen a lot. Back in the day, in the traditional forms, back in the day, I mean in like 2000 to 2010-ish, this era of time, it was just, I enjoyed the performance, but it was like massive, insane yelling on every tiny movement. It was like excessive noise. It was, ah, yeah, ah, 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 ah. Like everything had this like huge, big, explosive thing. And again, the traditionalists that don't compete in sport, the open style, ragged on it and then laughed at the sport because they took traditional, which traditionally, they had like 3 yells in a form. It was just like you do your I formation, you get to one position, and then you do a bunch of moves, and then you go another place, and there's a lot of hot air about why it is that way, but that is just the way it is. And you guys are, as you can tell, I have a little bit of disdain towards the traditional yelling and all this stuff. And should you yell too much? Should you not yell a lot? I'm just like, whatever. Any excuse that your old traditional master told you about why you yell on only 3 strikes versus 20, I think is absolute just nonsense, because it is. But hey, I don't know. I don't know what to say. I don't have any opinions on it. You guys can weigh in on that. Let me check up on your comments here. Looks like hopefully I didn't freeze. One second. I didn't freeze. All right, cool. I'm trying to catch the comments here, and all your comments froze for a second. Now I got to refresh my browsers. Technology. Boom. While I get I refresh your comments, please feel free to share the show. I want to get more people tuned in here. You guys are super active today and have a lot to say, so please hit that share button. Let's get more people tuned in here. This is an awesome episode. And let me mute that. And let me mute that. Mickey Lee made a comment about yells here. Mickey Lee says, they still yell excessively in CMX, and it's embarrassing as a martial artist to have to explain that to my non-martial artists. Yeah, it is kind of embarrassing. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna hate anybody that yells a lot in forms, because that's just how forms are. But I know that growing up, when I was in high school and middle school, and I would show my friends these forms that I was just so inspired by, they would just, they wouldn't get it. It's foreign to them. It's they laugh at it, like, why are they yelling like a bunch of maniacs all the time? But yelling is definitely part of it. It's definitely part of the art and part of the expression. And once you do it, you feel it and you get it, and it makes sense to you as a competitor. I think yelling is important. And, at the end of the day, what you're doing is a performance for forms. It really is. It's a performance using martial arts, and it's up to you. If you can figure out a way in the CMX division to win without yelling, go for it. But it's really hard to really give it your all and show your true power when you're not exerting yourself and exerting your force. And there's a lot of energy that comes from yelling. So I wouldn't get too caught up in that, and I definitely wouldn't encourage any rules that limit the amount of yells in an open style competition. Jason Warren says, and Mickey agrees, that Jason says, I have to modify our Korean forms to have a Japanese appearance, deepen the stances and yells, just so they have a shot at winning. My kids can throw awesome high kicks, don't even get accounted for. Yeah, again, I don't know. There does seem to be a bias on the Japanese thing. Maybe that's because the Japanese or the judges have Japanese backgrounds. I'm not really sure. It would make sense to me that if you're judging a Korean traditional division, you should have a Korean-style Taekwondo background, and if you judge a Japanese division, your judges should have a Japanese background. That seems like the only logical way to go about it, but of course there's always a lack of judges out there, and they're not getting paid, so it's really hard to create a really sound structure for judging in the tournament scene when there's no money being given to hire professionals to do it. So some of that you can blame the judges, and some of that you can blame the promoters. Some of that you can just blame the environment, I guess. Definitely need to have paid judges. Paid judges would fix that in a heartbeat, because then you'd be able to pay someone and they'd be accountable for proper judging, and you'd be able to hire qualified judges for that particular division. Like in the extreme division, I don't want traditional judges judging that division. I want somebody that has a understanding of martial arts tricking, an understanding of the history of sport karate in the past 20 years and its evolution. I want somebody that knows what they're looking at and really understands it to be those judges. I don't want a judge that only knows of, Shorin, Rari, Ruru, Ryao, Asian, Japanese, karate style, XYZ, whatever it is. I don't want that narrow-minded, not that he's narrow-minded, but I don't want this one guy that doesn't know what he's talking about being a judge and then judging you off of his narrow understanding of what you're doing, okay? Like, you do a side kick like this, and he's taught that you do side kick like this, and even though you did a cheat 10 in your form and you did a triple cork and you had an amazing pop front kick, he downgrades you because of, something of only within his understanding of martial arts. It's kind of messed up. And then you go ask for feedback, and he says, fix your foot so that it's the way that I was trained to do a kick. You're like, bro, that's how I was trained. I did it right. You have a different understanding. We've gotten nowhere. All right. Tony says, make sure the judges know the rules before they judge. Well, how about that? Okay, here's a real thing that we can definitely work off of. And yeah, you definitely need to know the rules in order to be a judge. And you should be able to ask questions in the middle of competition if you're not sure, and you should be able to, you should feel comfortable being humble enough to be like, hey, I don't know the rules. Perfect example, I'm talking about myself, Mr. Humble. A couple weeks ago, I was asked to be a center judge at a local tournament, and I've never judged at this tournament. It wasn't affiliated with NASCAR or any other thing, so I didn't know the official rules of this tournament, like what do you do in a tiebreaker, what do you do if this happens or that happens, or if there's this many competitors, or there's all these little tiny things in all these different ways. And I wanted to make sure that I didn't break the rules. I didn't want to make up my own rules. So anytime I had a question, pause the event, ask the promoter, get an answer, and then we could enforce the answer. And that's how it should be on a larger scale, and I don't know what that entails. Maybe something what we could do to help the judges when it's go time is give the center judge a headset. What about that? What if every center judge had a headset, and if you had a question, you could just go, what do we do in case of XYZ? And then there can be like somebody that's in charge that knows the rules that could be like, yeah, well, you need to do XYZ. I think that'd be a great way to help the rules stay more enforced, because I don't think that judges intentionally break the rules. Sometimes I think what happens is they either don't know the rules or they're too stubborn to, like, a lot of times it comes to being stubborn, and they're not going to take the time to go figure out what the actual rules are. They'll enforce their own versions of the rules. And actually, I think that might be because they've probably been to other tournaments where the tournament promoters have said, oh, just run the ring the way you want to, which isn't right, of course. So yeah, judges need to know their rules, and obviously, having them certified is key. But again, they're volunteers, so there's only so much you can put forth to enforce these volunteers to go through a certification thing. Having them being paid and being accountable would definitely go a long way as well. Ray says that the amount of cowbell needs to increase tenfold. Ray, it sounds like you have a fever, and you should go seek some Blue Oyster Cult. Anybody under the age of 20 is like, what are you talking about? Just don't worry about it. All right, Andy says, after they complete the form, they need to demonstrate the bunkai. And, okay, Andy, how is that going to work? So bunkai is the application, right? So I'm not sure. It's an interesting concept. How in the world would that? We only have, tournaments are only 2 days long, sometimes 3 days long. You did that. Your tournament's now 5-6 days long. How would you? I don't know. Interesting thought, though. I'm just going to move on. And then someone else comments on bunkai. Bunkai is the practical application of the form. So demonstrating a move from the kata actually on an opponent. If you look up a kata from WKF, you can see some examples. So in an open style tournament where you can do any form that you want, and then the judges says, please demonstrate how you would use this move in a practical application. Man, are we talking about the traditional division now, or are we talking about the open style? Because I gotta tell you something. The traditional forms, in my opinion, you get really too wrapped up in this whole bunkai concept with the forms. Have you ever seen a street fight or an MMA cage fight where they are sitting here in a front stance and doing this stuff, and their chest is fully exposed, they're in a deep stance and they're not mobile? I mean, you want to talk about bunkai, throw out all of traditional forms. There's no bunkai in any of it. Real bunkai is you're up, you're at your guard here, you're on your toes, you're moving, you're fighting. That's real. Okay? So you can make an argument as much as you want about this is how the really application is, and nonsense. Okay? It's nonsense. It's total nonsense. Yeah, okay. Traditional form definitely has its place in the sport, and you come up and you do this move or you do that move, and it does train your body to move in the right way, to execute that right mechanic. And once you're in a street fight, you can take those body mechanics and then do it from this position and execute the move. And I get that translation, but it's a spectrum. Traditional forms are not real fighting. That's the point I'm trying to make. Traditional forms are just that. They're forms. They're a way to practice martial arts. And then once you get into the extreme forms, again, it's I don't know. If you want to talk about bunkai and extreme forms, what's the point of a cheat 7? Having that extra spin isn't actually going to be applicable in any way whatsoever in a fight scene. It doesn't help you. So sometimes there is no bunkai in sport karate. It's anti-bunkai. It's what's the least practical thing that you could do because you're trying to be impressive and awesome. So I don't know. It's an interesting conversation, but I don't know how to enforce the rules. in a way that you can actually write them in a rule book and people can actually follow along without it being left to some sort of interpretation. Let me see what else you got going on in the comments here. Oh, you guys are still all about these the Korean and traditional thing. This is like a hot button issue for you. Christy says, at a recent tournament, they've told us that our kicks cannot be above the head in traditional Japanese. It all depends on your style. Yoshuakai, I don't know. That may be the rule, but not in our style of Kempo. Yeah, so in Japanese, the kicks can't be above the head, right? Because that's just like how the Japanese style is. It's all like, brute, linear force, and power, and like that's just the concept of the art form. And Taekwondo is a lot more flashier, high-level kicks and stuff. And that's what happens. You go do a Korean style, and the judges all think that you're supposed to be doing a Japanese style. You're going to get downgraded, and that could be because the judges either they hate your style, they're just going to downgrade you, or they didn't know the rules and they didn't know that it was allowed to kick above your waist despite their understanding of traditional. So a lot of holes there. I don't know how to fix them up. What else we got here? Jason says, I like what my old sensei says. Do what you've always practiced, and it will come back to you. He has been teaching since the early 70s. We don't do deep stances or the high kicks. So, Jason, you don't do deep stances or high kicks, and you compete in an open style circuit. So, the thing with the high kicks is like sometimes you have to trade off high kicks and then you have to sacrifice your stances. And sometimes when you do deep stances, you have to sacrifice by not doing the high kicks. So you're not kicking high and you're not going in low stances. What should we be judging you on? Because those are some of the fundamental things that I think that the sport, open style sport, should be based on, is like how high and how strong are your kicks, how deep are your stances. And again, that's for open, that's for CMX. Traditional, I don't know. So whatever your traditional style is, you should probably have a judge that is familiar with your particular style being your judge. And it shouldn't be an open style competition. Oh, you guys, oh my gosh. Oh, wow, look at all these comments. I am so far behind on the comments. I'm sorry, guys. Shout out to Dallas, by the way. Dallas, I'm not ragging on your particular sport. I was just talking about a particular comment, philosophy, not you in particular. Never hate the player, hate the game. That's my rule. I'm always going to support the athletes. Wow, what else we got going on here? My gosh, you guys are commenting more than you've ever commented before, so I apologize for being a little late because I'm trying to read them as they come through. I wish they would have a traditional Korean form division for kids, says Melissa, and that's something I've heard a number of times, and I've already been seeing some debates about that topic happening today, and some of the responses I've seen is there a big enough interest in traditional juniors to split Korean and Japanese, because I believe that it does get split in adult divisions, but not juniors. If it's split in adults, I think it should be split in juniors, and tournament promoters need to do an excellent job at making sure that those styles have a good amount of competitors. But then again, same time, I'm going to counter that argument and remind everybody that these are open style circuits, and it's supposed to be fundamentally style versus style. You should have a Korean traditionalist walk into the ring and a Japanese traditionalist walk into the ring and a Chinese traditionalist walk into the ring, and they should be able to do their performances and then get judged. Now, obviously, there's a problem with that philosophy, right? Because now when you're judging style versus style, you can't be nitpicky about their individual techniques, because that would require the judges being an expert at every single style, which they're not. And then you have to be more watered down in your judgment call and more take a step back and just look at their overall performance and like who was a stronger athlete kind of thing. And then that opens up the door for the style to get watered down and degrade and lose some of its rich character. So, not sure. I think maybe the healthy answer here is that if you are a hardcore traditionalist in a Korean style or whatever style, maybe what you ought to be doing, if it's just a collective, like how it should be, you should do some open style tournaments, but you should also go and compete in closed style. Like, go compete at a tournament that is specifically about your martial arts style, and then you'll be judged on your martial arts style. When you go to a big open style where anything goes, then you should be judged on a different set of criteria of like the general performance. How does your performance compare to the other performances? Maybe that just ends up all the Japanese guys win. So I don't know. Wally says that the rules for CMX and creative should be clarified. Same goes with sparring, point, and teams. So Wally, you raise like a hot button issue for me. The concept of the CMX, or the creative division in particular, the rules need updating. I attempted to share this document with you guys a few episodes ago, and I said I might. I wrote up like a 12-page paper about the creative division. I just never published it, and it was my thoughts about the flaws of the creative division, because there are a lot of flaws, and it is a broken division and doesn't make any sense, and it's not fair. And there's a lot of things wrong with it. And I'll briefly explain a couple of the things that I personally would like to see 2018 rule changes. First off, we need to define what a spin is, because everybody has a different interpretation of how you count a spin. For example, the 540 kick doesn't have 540 degrees of rotation in it. Now, if you're disagreeing with me at this point in time, the reason why we are at disagreement is because you count spins differently than I do. And that's where we need to come to a consensus of what is a spin. And then once we can determine what a spin is, then our disagreements will pretty much subside, because we'll all be on the same page of what is a spin, what isn't a spin. And I think that when you want to define a spin, you need to count in-air rotation as what is the spin. So the minute your body leaves the ground until the minute your body touches the ground again counts as the spin. So when you say you can only have one spin, that means your body, once it leaves the ground, can only rotate 360 degrees maximum before it lands. And by that set of rules, if that's how we are judging what a spin is, then a 540 kick is a 360 degree in-air spin, because as you go up, so this is my knee and this is my kicking leg, right? So here's the point where I lift my knee and I jump up, right? Actually, I'd be facing this way. Let me just do it here. Here's my 540. I'm going to come around. My knee's going to come up. This is the point. This is the point where I just left the ground. Here's my kick. I've now done 180 degrees in the air. If I were to land right here, that would be a 180 in the air. But you land on your kicking leg, right? So it comes around, boom. And now I've touched down back here. And remember, this is where I just jumped and did my kick. It was a 360. So it's a 360 spin. So if you're counting 360 spins, then 540s need to be allowed. Other things that need to be allowed if you allow 360 degrees, if you allow one spin in the air, jackknives, cheat 720 kicks, and double legs, as long as your hips don't go above your head. There's quite a number of moves. Even butterfly twist should be allowed. All of these moves fall within the rules as they currently stand, as they currently are listed on the website, but judges don't allow them. So there's a big conflict there, and there just needs to be a lot of clarification as to what counts and what doesn't. I also have a little bit of a modification on the invert rules, and they have done it over time. They used to say that anytime your hips went above your head, you were DQ'd in creative, and then they made a couple exceptions for forward rolls. They made an exception for kip-ups, where you kip up so your hip goes over your head and you pop up to your feet. Makes sense to me, but technically you should be disqualified anytime you kick and you bend over really far and you kick so much that your head goes below your hips. That should be a cause for disqualification. So I would advise that they change that rule you can't do any airborne inverts, meaning your body cannot be not touching the ground. At no point should when you're off the ground should your hips be above your head. If your body is touching the ground, it should be permissible that your head goes below your hips. That way you can do like a capoeira, like spinning hook kick where your hand like touches the ground, you know? Like that shouldn't be illegal in the creative division, but it is right now for no good reason other than late sloppy rulemaking. But I think I've had a long rant and a whole full episode about the creative division about 40 episodes ago, so maybe we could bring that up again at some point. It's good to talk about on a regular basis, basically until it changes. What else we got going on here? I'm going to check on you guys. Chrissy says, I heard someone tell me to do a Pop 720. I laughed and said, I'm 42 and I need knee surgery. Once they explained that it's a jump spin crescent kick, basically, which is a 360 spin, it was much less daunting. So yes, they actually need to evaluate the kick. Yes, that kicking rule was so hard to figure out last year when we did our first open tournament. Yeah. Well, okay, Chrissy, I don't know who told you. Pop 720 is actually 2 spins in the air. You might mean a cheat 720. Cheat 720 is 1 spin. A Pop 720 is actually 2. Pop 720, you start here, jump. I'm airborne. There's a half turn. There's a full turn. There's a half turn. And actually, it depends on how you land your Pop 7. So if you were to land at this point and do your hook kick and then come around, that's a 540 spin. But if you were to land both feet at the same time, kind of like a Pop crescent, you know how they do a jump spin wheel and they land both feet at the same time. If you do a cheat or a Pop 7 like that, then that's 2. So depending on how they land. So it's either a 540 in the air or it's a 720 in the air. But neither here or there. Yeah, Wally, yes, for inverts, at least 1 point of contact to the floor should be mandatory, or should waive the whole invert rule. As long as you are touching the ground, you should your head should be allowed to go below your hips. I mean, like, what happens if you do like a side kick, you know, like where you put your hands and feet on the ground and then you like side kick up? Like, why should that be disqualified in creative? By the rules, it is disqualified, and it's up to the judges to determine whether or not they want to follow these archaic, broken rules or not. So why not just fix the rules that say that you can allow that? Tyrone says, I don't know about changes, but what about enforcement? Last year, at the U.S. Open, several competitors went over their time limit, and yet they still placed. If you break the rules, that should be disqualification. Maybe I'm being harsh, but rules are rules. Tyrone, that's super interesting. Maybe you're talking about the traditional division, because I'm going to assume you're talking about traditional division, because I never see anybody in the creative and extreme divisions go over the time limit. They would be so exhausted to go over the time limit, because it's just such a high impact performance, and I just don't see. If anything, forms are too short sometimes. I look at them like, you won, and your form's maybe 30 seconds long. But yes, there should be very clear rules that state what happens if you break the rules. If you go over the time limit, if it does result in a disqualification, I don't know. I'm not up to speed if it does. Do you get disqualified? Do you not? It should be explicit in the rules, yes or no. And, you know, they need to be accountable for that. How do you know they went over the time limit? Did people time it? Very rarely do I see anybody actually time performances these days. And maybe the corner judges are timing them, but it's just it's just not a common thing. You just don't see it very often. And I think there's a lot of risk. Why would you want to have a form that long? That's just more chances for you to fail. You're not going to get scored higher because your form is longer. You're going to get scored lower because you started wobbling. It's just my opinion. Jeff Doss gets DQ'd every time. I don't know about that. Jeff Doss should get DQ'd every time. I'm just kidding. Wally says, should katas be used? Should music katas be to the music or with random music? So that's another thing that we had a little discussion about it yesterday, and the whole concept of musical forms, the musical forms division. I'll just recap kind of what I thought yesterday in case you weren't tuned in. But I kind of feel like the musical forms division is broken. It's not. It's not what it was originally intended to be. When the musical form divisions were going on in the 80s, 90s, it was a different style of music, and it was a different style of competition. The music had it was music. It was a real song that was hardly edited at all. For one, they didn't have the technology to edit songs, and two, like there just wasn't the point. The forms were a lot slower and more methodical, and like they moved to the song, and it was almost like a dance piece. You really expressed martial arts through musical movement, and that's not what we see today. Today, what we see is some trap songs, some high intensity EDM, fast beat remix of something, and it's just, and there's just a beat, and it just hits like this, for a minute, and how can you not have your form match the beat? Because if you're just moving just like the music is, then everything hits the beat, and it doesn't really have the same thing to it. And oftentimes the beat is moving at such a high rapid rate that it's hard to tell the practitioner is really moving to the beat at all. If that practitioner were to turn the music off and do the same form, the form would look the same and score the same with or without music. So the musical division is totally messed up and totally broken. And on top of that, we now run into these issues of copyright laws where sportmartialarts.com, ESPN, anybody that's trying to live stream these performances, they get shut down by Facebook and YouTube because you're playing copyrighted music through their services. It's a whole nother issue, and I don't know what to do about it. I don't know how you can make people. I don't know how you can take today's form sets and apply them to real music. I just don't see that happening, because that person would have to slow down their performance a lot, because we don't listen to music that is as fast as people that perform. And what are you going to do? How are you going to enforce that? If you really wanted to enforce it, it almost is like you'd need a separate score just for your level of synchronization to the music. Because a musical division at its heart is supposed to be a form set to music, and it just doesn't happen. It just doesn't. I know that there's some competitors that will argue with me and say, no, mine does, but it doesn't really. It doesn't. Go look through the history books, look at your form, and compare it to somebody, compare it to even Kim Do, who didn't really use music either. He just remixed pop songs in different orders, and it wasn't a song, it was just sound effects, and he moved to sound effects. But go through even further back in time to the 90s, John Chung, what's his name? No, Jean Fernet. Look up Jean Fernet. Look at that guy. That's a musical form. Look up Stephanie Flowers. That's a musical form. And I had this an example yesterday. Her song was like this classic, whatever it's called, the you know that song. You know that song, right? And it has a very certain sound to it, so that when she did her form, it matched to it. So she was really good at standing kicks. So it went and every kick hit those little beats, and it was truly a musical form. And that's just not something that exists anymore. So in 2018, this is what I think should happen. I think we should just kind of ditch the musical form division entirely, because there's nobody that specializes in musical forms. There's nobody winning because their music is synced to their form, except for rare exceptions like Jacob Ellis will come out once. Jacob Ellis is an exception, but he still doesn't have what I call a musical form. He has just a form that is synchronized to sound effects. So that's not like you'd never hear that song on the radio. You'd never hear that song on Spotify because it's just totally altered to, highlight a form. It's not really music in itself. It's not the true intention of the division. He just found a way to use it, the rules to, in a different way, which is cool. I support that. But the point is that I just think the musical division is totally whack. And as a lot of people have commented that the music in musical forms these days is not for the athlete or the competitor. It's just to hype up the crowd. And so I think what should happen, and this is kind of what already happens in other divisions, is you can use music in grands. I think that's how it should be. You don't do the music in the regular runoffs and the regular competition. You just do it in the final performances. This allows the traditionalists to use music, and it's super cool when you see a traditional form to music because it's got like this slow, epic, dramatic, it just makes that traditional form look so cool when it's to music. Same with open form. You should do is find some hot song you like and hope that you get on grand someday and train your form to the music and then just compete with it without music until you get to the stage, and then we get to see the true glory of your form. I think that's a smarter way to go. It'll make competitions go by smoother or faster at least, because right now it's just a redundant division. All it is right now, the musical division is just a second chance for you to compete doing the exact same form that you already did in extreme, and essentially the exact same form you did in creative, but without the tricks. I don't know. Not really sure. I mean, I don't know if you actually get your money's worth as it is, so maybe taking away one of your divisions is kind of like not fair because you're like, hey, I want to compete. Give me another chance, right? So I don't know. I just think it's a silly division. It's a great division to watch, though. I love watching it. Don't get me wrong. Like, as a spectator, it's a great division for a spectator. It's just the purpose of it's kind of weird. Mickey's calling me a cop-out. Mickey says that they need to enforce the judging. The musical forms winner was actually musical and choreographed as recently as the 2006 U.S. Capitol Classics because the judging was proper. The winner was really good, creative taekwondo routine done to classic rock. So Mickey Lee, obviously you're talking about one individual in particular. I don't know who you're talking about, to be quite honest with you. You're just thinking of one person. And yes, there are some people that do follow the rules as they were intended, but in general, the vast majority of how I see the musical division playing out, it's not the way it's supposed to be. You can point to externalities and you can point to like exceptions to everything I'm saying, but in general, what I'm saying holds water and it's valid. Nicole says we should save money. We wouldn't have to pay for the extra division. Well, you don't have to compete in it as it is, but it is expensive. There's no doubt about it. Like this competing on a national scale is not for is not for the average family. You gotta sacrifice a lot, and it costs a lot of money to go to these tournaments. There's no doubt about it. Mickey says, hate the judging, not the division. Yeah, sort of. I still hate the division. Music, I have some problem with. I hate the creative division for sure, and I've gone through it for many reasons. You can have the most qualified judge, the most sincere, capable, competent judge, that follows follows the rules to a T, but the rules don't make sense. So the rules need to be changed. So there's both that come into play here. It's not one or the other. It's not a black and white issue. Mickey Lee, if you want to save money, don't compete, period. Yeah, that's true. Jason says, I want to tell everyone to keep it fun. As long as the kid has fun, I'm happy. True. This is kind of a rant and rave kind of episode. And we should just, like, let's take a step back. Thank you, Jason. Let's take a step back and remember the point of competition and the point of this. And it is a fun thing to do. It is life-changing. It's awesome. You make the best friends. Kids that compete in this growing up turn into amazing human beings because they have learned how to be super focused, and they have amazing experiences well beyond what their average peers are getting, because they get to travel and see the country. They get to train a very cool art form that not only encourages them to be athletic and creative, but also to work hard and smart and train self-defense. Like they hit all of these super important things that make you a great person. And martial arts and mixing it into sport aspect is just a truly phenomenal blend of things. And that's why people are willing to, put up with some inconsistent rules and some unfair judges and some like all of this like BS and the politics and why things aren't fair and why things cost so much money and all that stuff. It's because the sport itself at its heart is truly amazing, and there's not much out there that can compare to the value you get out of training something like sport karate for a living. So it's awesome. So anything we're talking about here, we're talking it from the perspective of enthusiasts, of fans, of people that love the sport and just want to see it continue to grow and evolve. And there's a lot of factors at play when we want to change things. But having a talk show like this and just being able to, have an open discussion is totally fine. It's totally cool. Richard Osborne says it's an underappreciated part of martial arts in the U.S. So many schools are against open competitions. And I think there's a lot of reasons why they're against competitions. And I think a lot of it actually comes down to the fact that we don't do enough to make the competition scene a better experience for the competitor. We don't do enough to raise our voices to say that we need to update the rules. We need to have judges enforced. We need to have great venues. We need to have, a fair system. We need to make sure that everybody's happy and they're going to come back next year. And we need to make sure that the martial arts schools that are sending their kids to these tournaments are getting something out of it. Maybe monetarily wise, but also just like retention wise. Like if you start sending kids to, Diamond Nationals or whatever tournament, you send them year after year, those families are going to be with your martial arts school for a long time because they're so dedicated and they're so in. And schools can gain a lot from competitions, but a lot of them have become afraid of it. It's just too much for them. They're just turned off by the scene. And we do need to do some drastic things in the sport, in my opinion, to get more schools. I'd say 1% of martial artists actually show up to national tournaments, maybe. It's a very small percentage of people. Even think about the people in this chat right now. Think about the people at your martial arts school. How many of them actually show up to these big tournaments? Not very many. Maybe there's a handful of them that will show up to a near local national, but competing nationally, no way. It's like this is the smallest percentage of people, and I think that just needs to increase. We need to get more excitement into the sport side of it, and some of that involves conversations, and some of that involves having more legitimacy and caring more about the competitor than we already do. So we are about up for our time. We get an hour a day. It's a little after our hour spot. I always go a little bit over, but I just wanted to say thank you. There was so much conversation going on today. I didn't even get through half of the comments that you guys left before the show even started, and then you guys put so many comments in the chat here today that I could not keep up. So thank you everybody for tuning in for another episode of Live with Wolfman. Today is episode number 48. I'm sorry. Tomorrow's episode 49. I'm just excited for number 50. Can't believe episode 50 is coming up. But tomorrow we're gonna have Danny Etkin joining us, the legend himself, Mr. Chucks, Mr. Tricks, Mr. Awesome. Danny's an amazing martial artist, great instructor. Can't wait to have him on the show. Like, It's going to be cool. We're going to start the show a little bit later because the kid is still in high school technically, and tomorrow he has an early release or something on Wednesdays. And long story short, we're just going to wait until he gets home and he can like connect with us and Skype it up. And so we're probably going to air it at, I don't know the exact time, but anticipate around 2 p.m. Or maybe 1:30 Eastern Standard Time. So just kind of be alert for that, and I'll give everybody more of an update tomorrow about when that's happening. But until then, keep it real. I also have some other exciting things coming up with the show. I'm not going to say anything else, but they're pretty cool. I'm just going to say that. I got some cool stuff planned. So thank you guys, as always, for watching. If you haven't yet, get some floating hearts in there, leave some comments, hit the share, and make sure you join Live with Wolfman on the Facebook group area. If you don't know where that is, just click the description. It should say Live with Wolfman somewhere. Make sure you join the group. That way you can see future episodes. All right, everybody. I'll chat with you all later. Hope you have a great day. Peace out.